Okay, thank you very much for joining this session. I think this is one of the most important sessions, in fact, of the whole event. What we're addressing here is the risks which comes from remote working, which we've all been experiencing on and off now for more than a year in some cases. So our subject is using disruptive technologies to enhance secure remote operations. We've got about 45 minutes. What I'd like to do is give the opportunity for the panelists here to introduce themselves very quickly so that you can understand their background. You've heard them. So please, I'll introduce first of all Ray. If Ray could give a few background words on yourself, please.
Sure. So I'm Ray Irving, and I'm the Global Head for Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or FSISAC. And our mission is we're a non-profit dedicated to the resilience of the financial services sector. And we work very much like a neighborhood watch for the sector, sharing intelligence about threats and incidents that our members are seeing. And also we do a lot of incident coordination and response, and of course, exercises and playbooks so that people can get ready for how to deal with bad things when that actually happens. Prior to that, I've got a background in financial services, information technology, and security. I've spent many years delivering security programs and projects, including data leakage prevention and security information, event management, and so on. So,
thank you very much. Thank you. Can I have a few words from Tony? Thank you.
G'day, Mike, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tony Kitzelmann. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at the Australian Digital Health Agency. My primary role is providing leadership to the organisation in regards to securing the national platforms that are used to deliver digital health services for Australia. I'm also a large advocate for the ISAC, so it's great to hear Ray talking about the work he's doing overseas there. We're pushing to move the HISAC, so the Health ISAC, into the Asia Pacific region to create a collaborative partnership model across our sector. We all know that cyber has no boundaries, and for me, building these creative models where we can actually engage with the sector to bring new solutions to the health sector, which in some ways lags ahead of others, behind other sectors, and help them and take advantage of the technologies out there. I'm looking forward to having a bit of a chat today around what disruptive technologies are in the broader sector and how they can potentially be aligned to how we deliver health services for our citizens.
Great, thanks very much. Alvin, please.
I'm Alvin Rodrigues. I'm the Field Chief Security Officer at Infoblox. I'm a big advocate of cybersecurity, but more from a standpoint of helping organizations to look at cybersecurity from a business angle. I also recently started a business technologies group in Hong Kong some time ago that focuses on taking a business angle about cybersecurity and trying to contextualize security from a business perspective, because cybersecurity is not a technical discussion, it's actually a business discussion, and therefore it should take that as an angle. Prior to Infoblox, and Infoblox is a company that is a DNS service provider that helps you to manage your core network as well as to build security into your core network functionality. Prior to Infoblox, I was also the security strategist at ForcePoint as well as at Fortinet, predominantly in the security space, and spent a lot of time talking to executives across the region, across different verticals, about security in a very highly contextualized fashion against their business model, the business landscape, and the business backdrop.
Great, thanks very much. And finally, last but certainly not least, Dr. Stan Wong.
Hi, I'm Stan. I have an academic background and I'm working for HKT now, responsible for the 5G security deployment and also the other project as well. So I am a standardization delegate from HKT. For example, the GSMA 3GGP SA3 and also MGNN, and then also the Wireless Broadband Alliance and GTI as well. So I used to work in Europe, contribute to different European Commission projects, and the first European Commission project on 5G, I was involved in leading the security task. So that's, I joined HKT last year. That's where I am. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping on time, exactly 5 minutes. So without further ado, I'd like to put some questions to the panel. Please feel free to jump in whichever order you wish. Everybody will have a chance, of course. So let's go straight to the middle, the guts of the matter, so to speak. For remote operations, do we need to revisit how we secure device access level and user access level, two separate things? And if so, what disruptive technologies are available to help to do this? Would anybody like to take the lead, please?
Sure.
Thank you, Ray.
So yes is the short answer. You will need to revisit everything. The transition to remote operations is going to open up new control gaps as you move your workforce outside your traditional perimeter, and you're going to understand what those control gaps are, and you're going to need to assess how to deal with those, how to mitigate them. So that's going to be a lot of work. And in terms of disruptive technology, I'm not a huge fan of the term because it implies that we're going to need to have some new, exciting, sexy tech that's going to come along and save everything. And what we tend to see in technology, as you know, is much more of an evolution. And the things get rebranded, and those of us who've been around for years realize that actually it's pretty much the same technology, it's just subtly changed. So there's a lot of vendors at the moment claiming to have new solutions that are going to solve all your working from home problems with exciting new capabilities. There's no silver bullet. You're not going to be able to buy zero trust computing in a box and install that and then be able to give up. It's going to be much more complicated than that. So you're going to be much more using existing technologies and processes and adjusting them to the new environment in which your workforce are located. I'd say in terms of probably the most interesting new tech is something called SASE, or SASE, which I know Gartner are huge fans of that at the moment. I think they've got some white papers on that. And SASE seems to be basically a cloud-based security stack, which is very easy to deploy even to remote workers, and that reduces the amount of different things in your own security stack on your own workstations. Should make management a little bit easier. And then you've got all the traditional endpoint security solutions from people like CrowdStrike and Cisco and so on, which are going to become more and more important in the remote working world. Because don't forget, when you have an incident on a remote worker, you can't just go and unplug them from the network. It's going to be a bit more complicated to respond.
It's Tony. Look, I've got to jump in and agree. It's we're seeing a lot in our sector for us as our workforce is moving out onto the wire and we're trying to engage with them, getting better telemetry about what's actually going on there, because the traditional models don't necessarily line up with how we need to secure them and keep them safe on the deliver their services. So understanding the changing environment, and we're dealing with the reality of the world that some people are connecting on brilliantly quick with high-speed NBN backbones and driving onto the network. And it's like they're in the office, and other parts of the teams that we're having challenges with on being able to give them the support and management. Also, I think from the health sector perspective, the embracing of technology has been really interesting over the last 6 to 12 months as telehealth now starts to deliver better services. So we've seen healthcare practitioners who have been very traditional in the approach of delivering health services, embracing telehealth and jumping onto the social media platforms to engage with their patients and actually deliver better health services. So that's been a challenge for us to work with the sector and say, well, what are the real world considerations you have now as you deliver these services into your sector? And how do you balance the risk of making sure that the healthcare is appropriately delivered in a timely fashion, noting that some of the technologies used we would not traditionally consider secure enough for this type of environment. So we've been evolving quite rapidly around helping the business understand the risk. And Alvin's comment earlier on before about cyber is just about understanding business risk. I think it translates very heavily into this particular subject.
Great, thank you very much. Anybody else care to comment on this, Alvin?
Yeah, sure. When I was actually thinking about this topic, right, I was actually thinking about it from a standpoint of, I think, with the move towards remote operations, all the more we need to be more diligent and maintain a very clear understanding on the role and workflow of the business, and to look at the criticality of the access of not only the devices, but also the user. So user privileges becomes very important because unlike in the past, whereby everything is on-prem, you can easily lock down a device to what Ray has said. How do you then manage isolation, or how do you do quarantine when the person is actually working remotely when he's been compromised? So this is where you need to look at the roles, the function, the responsibility of the person within that environment, and to look at how do you then give privileges to both device and user in managing that. I know and have spoken to many executives in organizations that because of COVID, they are very, very uncomfortable that many people are working from home, accessing very sensitive company information in an environment that does not have the enterprise level robustness of cybersecurity. Many of them expound on looking at, to what Tony has spoken about, CrowdStrike and many of the endpoints on that. Well, technology can only do so much, but I think we need to look at, the whole risk management and the whole business process of this, and to see how do we actually drive this agenda forward, and then look at it through that lens.
Great, thanks very much. Anybody else got a comment?
Yeah, I would like to have a comment on that.
Thanks, Stan, please.
So we, as an operator, we are quite concerned about the remote access to our network because we have a lot of operational devices and network elements. But on the other hand, I understand on the device end-to-end user point of view, there will be a secure environment will be better. As far as I understand, GSMA has already have a framework for identity on each of the device, because at the moment, most of the devices identify the device, not identify who's using that device. So I think on top of that, we have to solve the identity on all the devices as a human being who's using it, and then combined with that will help us to identify all the issues and what happened.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think that's a great point. Identifying the device, then say who's actually controlling that device.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Let's move into the next point. Would a reorganization of security processes into interlinked clusters improve risk posture, and particularly if we take a zero trust model? Anybody like to get their mind around that one to start with, please? Otherwise, I'll pick you. Perhaps.
feel like back in school again, eh?
Okay, Alvin, you're in the hot seat.
Okay, I'll have a go at it. The short answer is it depends, because you need, again, when you think about risk management models, every company's enterprise risk management model is different, and the most important thing around security processes. So we have the process, and then we have the risk model that looks at the audit, looks at the criticality of the different assets that security is supposed to protect, and then we apply the management concept of zero trust. So theoretically, it should work, it should improve, but like anything, right? We need to make sure that it's viable. We need to make sure that in that process of putting together the security process, it does not create friction. One of the biggest challenges that organizations have when they rethink about security and improving its process is when they deploy new processes, new policies, it generates a lot of friction. And hence, we get a situation whereby, okay, by right, I will do this, but actually in reality, I'll do something else, because it's creating a lot of additional work for me, or it's making it very inconvenient for me to achieve the level of productivity that I'm supposed to do in my job, so that I can achieve these objectives that I have committed to my business units or to my department. So this is where we need to harmonize and take a look around, not so much as reorganization, but making sure that we have better alignment with security processes, with risk management, with business objectives. If we have that clarity and alignment across the entire model, and then we layer the whole zero trust concept on top of that, I think that would be a better approach.
Great, thanks very much. Anybody else like to comment on that one, please? Ray, I think you look like jumping in there for a while.
I was just nodding. I think Alvin's absolutely right that a holistic approach is going to be very helpful, that you're going to need to look at all of your processes in context, and clearly understanding them is going to help you to be more secure. And yes, if you've got things grouped so that particular approvals and other processes are segregated, that's obviously going to make lateral travel and all of those things more difficult. Also, it's going to help you in your next audit because you're going to need to be able to talk about those processes and explain how they work as well. Another point is the flip to remote is going to change what you see as important from a security perspective. For example, you might not care if somebody's printing out in the office, but if they're printing out at home, that might be worrying, you know, because you know that those papers are not controlled in any way and they may not be disposed of in a safe way either. So you're going to need to go back to fundamentals and ask yourself some pretty basic questions as well about things that you've understood for many years to just be a fact of life. Some of those facts are going to change. Sure, and put more controls in on what can and can be done. Absolutely. Tony or Stan, any particular comment on this one, or do you think they've been addressed already?
No, Ray and Alvin brought up some good points. I think the other component that I'm conscious of now as we change and this new work from home paradigm arrives, and well, actually has arrived, is what's the cultural impact and how do we as an organisation keep that cyber culture or that security culture moving through the organisation as the workforce becomes disconnected from its traditional cultural models where, like Ray said, we're in an office, we might be considering it's okay to print out. Well, then how do we deal with the isolation factor that the workforce may be simply at a virtual end for the next year or so, and how do we make sure that we bring them on the journey? And I think for me, we've had to adapt our processes inside the organisation in regards to how we onboard new staff, how we monitor, how we provide support from a compute perspective. And the one thing that keeps popping up is the customer's experience. And we've got folk who have joined our organisation who have never worked for us in a physical paradigm. They've always been virtual from day one because they've arrived during the COVID. So for us, it's how do we communicate our cultural expectations around security? How do we help them come on board with it where we don't have that traditional model of sitting beside somebody and saying, well, this is how I would approach it, where they're just at that length of the wire. So it's been an interesting change. I definitely think, though, that we need, the risk posture is changing, the remote workforce is out there, and the endpoint is becoming very hard to measure where it stops at. And it truly is a bit of a challenge for all of us.
I think it is. Thank you. Stan?
Yes. I do believe zero trust model, it's a defense model, never trust, always verify. That's what we're trying to apply to our core network at the moment. Because as an operator, we do defense more than offense. These zero trust model, it's our defense mechanism whenever that the AD surface getting access, or the one of our engineer using those different types of network element to acquire data to do their job, so in a daily basis. So because there is a lot of different types of data existing in our network, and we protect our customers' data is more important than anything. Also, there are some law restrictions. We cannot allow anyone to access it. So zero trust model, it's quite important to us, and especially on 5G development, because it will involve virtualization and containerization. We basically we lack of visibility on the network, different from the old day. So that zero trust model is quite important as I
Great, thanks very much, Stan. I think what you've just mentioned there is a great sort of segue into the next point which we would like to discuss, is that particularly in the regulated industries, they're moving towards continual risk management type of model monitoring. And is this viable for remote operations? What tools are available, particularly behavioral analytics, perhaps using AI? Of course, AI is the biggest buzzword. You've got AI in toasters and cookers at the moment, I believe. But I think the real AI is to be used in predictive analytics as opposed to regular analytics looking backwards. So, what are your views on continual risk management in the remote situation?
Can I kick off on this one? Because
Please do, Alvin.
Okay, I want to introduce another idea in addition or in parallel to Zero Trust. I know that there is a big focus and a big push and huge marketing around Zero Trust, but I also like everybody to think about this other framework from Gartner. It's called CATA. It basically means continual assessment risk. continuous assessments and risk model. And basically what it does is that it's in sync with the questions that we're asking right now. And it's basically about always authenticating, yes, and always checking, but it's a continuous process whereby you're looking at the different control mechanisms and making sure that those control mechanisms do not create friction. In discussion with some executives, one of the biggest concerns around zero trust is the possibility of friction being created in the process that really undermines the role of cybersecurity in the process of deploying it. And it's obviously useful in certain industries, like for example, in the military, definitely, you know, they take zero trust to the extreme, because one example I just want to share on that is that I remember visiting the Indian Army for a meeting, and because I'm not an Indian citizen, right, and we were talking about something to do with security for the Indian Army. That meeting, believe it or not, was held in the guardhouse, little corner kind of, you know, restroom, where I was talking to one of the executives over there about, you know, securing the military's network and everything, which was quite funny. But that's an example of zero trust. Whereas continuous trust or continuous assessment is all about looking at the situation and then leveraging a certain risk score to it, and then deciding to trust, not to trust, to allow or not to allow. And that's where, you know, the role of AI and machine learning comes into play, because then you'll be looking at different scenarios. A simple example, and this is the quote to one of my previous lives, whereby I was talking extensively to a lot of organizations around adaptive trust. And what it actually talks about is a person comes into the office at 8 p.m. and starts downloading. You know, is that a risk? Is that a potential insider threat? Well, we don't know. We need to monitor. But as the process of monitoring, we reduce his privilege. We reduce his ability to do, you know, we block his thumb drive, for example. We block his access to the internet, for example, as the activity goes on and on. Because if you look at a person who's hogging data on his notebook, right, it's the same as somebody who's actually doing research for a project. The person will also download tons of information from the computer network and start doing analysis to come out with a project paper and then, you know, present it to management. Well, in the same way, the person who's planning to steal the data will also be doing it in a similar fashion. So you start looking at little indicators: what time of day, when is he doing it, what sort of data is he accessing to it, is it sensitive information? You look at this person, does he have a poor appraisal? So this is where you take a more holistic view, a more realistic view on the situation to then look at it and determine the risk score of an individual, to determine the level of access or the level of restriction you then start to apply onto the person over time. And this is where you combine both behavioral analytics, machine learning, as well as information about the person, you know, HR records, for example. This is where, to the earlier point about clustering security policies, becomes very challenging to do something like that. You need to openly be able to aggregate those information from different data points for you to get a view like that.
Great, thanks very much. Ray or Tony, a view?
Sure. So, I mean, Alvin's given a very good treatment and overview there of what you need to be considering. I mean, a few words about AI, which was, of course, one of the previous buzzwords and new exciting technologies. So AI is going to help you solve scalability issues with human analysis. So you're going to find it useful in things like anomaly detection, as we've just discussed, malware detection, and automating repetitive tasks. So things like anti-phishing and tricky stuff like recognizing you when your logo has been placed on a fake website, that kind of thing. AI is going to be helpful for all of that. But the old maxim of garbage in, garbage out applies to AI too, because AI, it's like teaching a child. So if you teach it badly, it's not gonna work in your best interests. So you're going to need very good data to feed your AI and train it, and you're going to need a good model as well. You're going to need to understand what you're trying to do. It's not going to work to just throw all your security logs at an AI and say, figure this out. You're going to need to understand what's in your security logs, and you're going to need to understand the kind of things that you're looking for. So it's going to help you, but it's not going to do your job for you.
Good. So people are still required.
Yeah,
absolutely, yes. But it is going to be useful. And if you've got false assumptions in all of that, then you're going to get false positives. If you've got bad data, the same thing. And don't forget, AI for example, if I go onto YouTube, it will recommend videos to me. Now, if 50% of the videos that YouTube recommends are not interesting, I don't mind. I'm still going to find some good stuff. But if 50% of my alerts in a security monitoring tool are false positives, that is going to be a major operational headache. So security probably isn't the best place to start playing with AI. You're going to need a mature and robust implementation for that.
Great, thank you very much. Anybody else like to comment on this one?
Yeah, it's Tony.
Tony.
I agree with both what Alvin and Ray have said. And as I watch across the threat landscape and you see these sophisticated actors coming up against your environments, they're not noisy anymore. They're very considered about how they get into your system. They're going to move slightly. They're going to move across the environments and really replicate those behaviors that we would consider normal from a user perspective. I think the trick for us, and I look at our national health system where we've got 60+ thousand healthcare providers connecting in, delivering health services. AI is going to play such an important part for us in the future around building what is normal behaviour for a healthcare practitioner. How do we find those slight changes in behaviour that would be an indicator to actually raise their risk score and then help us understand better the exposure that we may have? I also think that there's going to be a lot of work that we need to play around using AI to our advantage and actually understanding better what the adversary is doing. So using AI to scrape out the data in the dark web and start to build proper crime profiles for the threat actor so we can easily pattern up their behaviour, but also predict what they're going to be doing in the future. It's emerging opportunities for us. It's just where does it stop? I think Ray summed up before. It's new, but it's also old, and it's just a re-evolution of existing approaches and methodologies towards technology.
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much. And Stan, a last word from the telco view.
Yeah, I always think AI it's a more intelligent expert system. We need more data to understand and then get the result more accurate. But a lot of systems, when they integrate, they forgot what is the normal state. The normal state can be defined. It's very varied. Also, when they learn, what exactly they learn and where is the intelligence in the system. That's what I'm quite often to see a lot of veranda. They misunderstand what exactly the AI means. Sometimes they think data filtering it's the AI. Sometimes they think if-then list of if-then policy is AI. But I do think we need behavioral analytics in our network, especially when we apply to cloud, when we're using cloud or a lot of softwareization technology apply into our network. I do agree with all our panelists, the ideas. We need to have more data to understand what exactly going on.
Great, thank you very much.
Michael, can I
Yes.
just one more point with regards to AI? The experience that I've had with AI with many of the organizations I've spoken to is that as much as we all like artificial intelligence, we also need to keep in mind that the success of the artificial intelligence resides on the need of having a human overlay factor to monitor the progress of AI. Because the thing about AI, it thrives in an environment that is constant. Now, we all know that business and business workflows and business changes is always in state of flux. So that's where you have the human intervention to go in to constantly feed into the system that right now the business is running in this way, and therefore this is the new normal. And therefore, the following behaviors are going to be, we are going to be evolving towards the following types of activities and behavior, and therefore this is not an abnormality. And AI will then have to pivot again to cope with that in order for it to remain effective. And this conversation stems off one of the sessions I had in Australia, whereby they were concerned about AI taking over and replacing jobs. Whereas the way that I was trying to explain to them is that no, it doesn't. We still need the human expertise who understands the non-tech kind of environment to feed into AI for AI to be effective.
Right. No, thanks. Yeah, absolutely good. There's a very good final word. We're looking. Perhaps is there a way of measuring, something like a security risk score, a kind of an ISO type approach, a methodology, not an ISO standard. There's plenty of standards for security, we know that, but to improve security for remote operations. Is such a concept viable? Any thoughts? Perhaps Ray, what do you think? Risk score?
I'm a little cautious about this one because it's going to be another compliance standard.
Yes, of course, yes.
And we all know, for example, in financial services, we have the PCI DSS standard, which you need to be compliant with in order to process payments from the big credit card companies. Now, plenty of firms which are fully compliant with that have been breached. So we know that checking those compliance check boxes on its own is not going to be enough, that you're going to need something more sophisticated.
Right. Okay.
That said, maybe it would be helpful if there was some standardization there. There's certainly plenty of firms that offer risk scorecarding of various kinds. And of course, you can always go to one of the big consulting firms, and they will be happy to come in and do a risk scorecard for you as well. So there's plenty of ways to do that at the moment, but it's difficult to compare them. It's difficult to benchmark yourself against peer organizations. So potentially there, that could be helpful.
Right, right. What do you think about that, Tony, in the context of healthcare? Is it something that's on your radar?
Absolutely, and I think Ray's nailed it on the head. You can have a checklist and be compliant, but still be at risk. And I think what I like to see is when I can see a business organisation or a unit come back to me and talk to me about the business risk that they're delivering their services in and what they're doing in a real world scenario to manage it, and where they can contextualise business risk into something that's measurable, demonstrates to me a more mature model. I'm a big fan of maturity models where I can see an organisation articulate in broad concepts of where they want to go. And if they link to a standard, that's good as a benchmark. But the conversation, I think, is more important. All too often I see organisations that are highly compliant, still get breached, and then go back to foundations when you get in there and go, geez, guys, you really didn't understand the nature of the business that you were delivering. You truly didn't measure the risk associated with delivering that service in a way that was meaningful. So if we could actually get the business to embrace an understanding that it's a bit of a journey that they need to be on, pick a framework, doesn't matter which one it is, but pick a framework and then contextualise that into the real world of your business. I think that'll be the trick to us cracking it.
Great, thanks very much. Any other comment on that particular one? Stan, any view?
Yes.
Alvin?
I have some views on the standardizations because this is static work. So we take the specifications and we implement them. We believe them, it's secure. But however, when you operate the networks, it's totally different world. We have to have a best practice way to do things, experience, and also culture as well. The corporate culture is quite important. As a whole HKT, we do have the ISO 27 and 1000. So we often request others to have that, but it doesn't mean when they have that certificate get a take, like Ray said. We believe their service is secure. We need to continuous monitoring and measure their trustworthiness. That's quite more than the certificate, I think.
Great, thanks very much. Okay.
I want to offer.
We've got about 10 minutes left, but Alvin, please, we need your view.
Okay.
Go ahead.
A bit more controversial because I've been working on risk score with several companies. So there's two angles that I look at risk score. Yes, the compliance thing and then having a tick in the box. Yes, definitely. But the other one is it's a form of measurement for an organization to report back to management how they are doing, because currently they are taking the SOC reports to tell them the effectiveness of their cybersecurity. So in the conversations I had with some of these companies that offer risk security risk score, they endeavor to look at the hygiene factor, the health check, and the effectiveness of the security. It's almost like cyber range, but not quite cyber range, because they look at the security posture of the organization. For a vendor, for people in healthcare, for governments and everything, my conversation with them around the risk score is that they want to see a vendor with a high risk score, because considering the current third-party breaches that's happening, right? They are concerned that they're doing business and they're depending on people that may not be so secure internally, and they are depending on them as part of their value chain and part of their workflow, their delivery of their services. So therefore, risk score then becomes another element to tell them that, okay, this guy has a good cyber hygiene, right? The third area about risk score is cyber insurance. I've worked with a couple of companies in Europe, and they look at getting a high risk score to mitigate high cyber insurance premium. A couple of companies I know in France, looked at this and slowly and gradually grew their risk score from 400. And by the way, a 400 score is considered very low, all the way up to 800. And the difference in terms of premium that they pay is 5 times less when you have a basic risk score to an advanced risk score. So these are different areas. Now, risk score is still evolving, and I believe that it will find its place alongside with compliance, and maybe even more than compliance, because risk score looks at the business operation, the business drivers, and the business systems and frameworks, and then puts a scoring in place together with the security deployed and the effectiveness of security. So I see it more than just compliance, and I'm waiting to see what it sits itself into in the entire security ecosystem.
Right. Yeah. In particular, a remote compliance and risk score.
Remote.
Very much so.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left, or I think. Last question I'd like to put to everybody, if I could. Again, what technologies, disruptive or otherwise, are being used to deliver sensitive data in healthcare, financial services, government services? And are the providers of these during the period that we've just seen under COVID? In other words, the remote workers, the remote customers. Perhaps I ask Tony first, because without looking at healthcare, then followed by Ray, and then Alvin, and finally the last word from Dr. Stan. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's a great point, and I look at and not so much disruptive technologies, but it's the adoption of existing technologies that weren't previously used in that. The one that jumps to mind is, for example, we've just recently gone through a massive uptake around telehealth, and I talked about it earlier on, but also we've seen significant changes in the way for e-prescribing, for the doctor's engagement between the patient and the pharmacy for the provisioning of scripts for medications. And these technologies were always there, but the disruptive component was the social demand that came upon the sector, where they had to evolve and adapt rapidly to what was actually being put in front of them. We were seeing a sector previously that was, I suppose, resistant to change and not wanting to adapt to the technologies that were there. But once that cultural shift and the demand had moved, we'd seen those traditional technologies getting picked up. I see social media at the moment, social tools like the instant messaging products, and that becoming a part of the integral component for delivering health service, especially when we're talking in really remote locations. Because a GP in the middle of Australia may not have access to the latest secure telehealth product, but they'll actually use an existing existing social media platform to deliver it, and then we give them some common sense guidance on what they can do to actually use that to deliver health services. Because the risk of not delivering health services in this particular scenario far outweighs the potential exposure they may have of using non-traditional tools.
Right.
So getting that balance right, because sometimes we just have to get those services out to our consumers and give it to them. It's been a challenging environment, and I must admit, I'd love to see more disruptive technologies that come on and force an evolution effect. I'm not so convinced that we're going to see that, but I think we might see just the existing tools used differently.
Now, what you just described is interesting. I'm no longer a spring chicken. My doctor's in Hong Kong. I've been stuck in the Philippines for a year. I usually have an annual physical. I couldn't have it with my doctor's got all my records. So I had the physical here. I had all the blood tests done here. I scanned them, sent them to him by secure email. He checked that, checked the physical, ticked a few boxes and said, just talk to the doc a bit about this and that. And I got the doctor here and got my prescription. So that was actually transnational. Sorry, let's go back first now to what was I was going to say second? I think it was Ray, financial.
Yes, so I think, as we've just heard from Tony, it's not necessarily the case that we're going to be deploying new technologies here. I think it's very much more about leveraging what you've already got. And we have to remember that this time last year, CIOs and their teams were all working round the clock to transition their workforce to remote working. And in many cases, these were people who didn't even have laptops or PCs at home. So there was a huge amount of effort just to get those people deployed out there. And in financial services, we also had a transition to much more e-banking, contactless payments, and so on. So there was a change in the way that the business was being conducted by a lot of the customers. And we also had, of course, relief checks in some countries, or mortgage relief, or other schemes to help people deal with the pandemic, which again, they were new business activities that needed to be supported by IT. So with all that going on, I don't think there was much time for people to start saying, oh, what new technologies should we be buying? I think they're looking at that now. And what I've been hearing from our members is that a lot of cyber programs are going to be boosted now, as a larger part of your business footprint is sitting outside the perimeter and in the digital world. So people are going to be adjusting what they're doing now. That said, I mean, we've talked about continual risk monitoring, cloud-based security, artificial intelligence. All those things are going to be leveraged, and they're all going to help to make these things easier than they would have been in the past.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, one of the reasons I was actually in the Philippines and got stuck here in many ways was the BPO industry. You know, it's a huge employer here. They've spent so far $2 billion just out of interest on their remote strategies in the Philippines to deal with this alone. Philippines had some of the biggest lockdowns. It's still going on in some areas. So this is huge. Alvin, please.
Okay. So with the whole discussion around, disruptive technologies and remote working and everything, one of the key things I just wanted to highlight to put things in perspective is that all activities right now is generating a lot of data, a lot of sensitive data, whether it comes from telemedicine or whether it comes from virtual banking, or whether it comes from smart manufacturing in the manufacturing plants that all are observing social distancing in the light of the current COVID situation. The thing I want to draw the attention to is that one of the biggest concerns that I know that many organizations currently have is, number one, ransomware, number two, data exfiltration. And as a result of that, I urge everybody to rethink about their cybersecurity, to look at embracing DNS security. And I come from a standpoint that yes, it's great that you have a defense in depth, but defense in depth is all about protecting port 80. DNS traffic goes on port 53, which is usually unregulated and unmanaged and unsecured. As a result of that, that's where we find a lot of data exfil actually happening. And that's where we find a lot of CNC malware actually coming in and doing the remote callback to the host. So as we look at remote working and data and digital transformation and embracing new technologies and maximizing existing technologies, we need to rethink about how do we also secure those environments, and to also look at DNS as part of that conundrum as we build a strong defense in depth together with DNS security.
Great, thanks very much. We've got a couple of minutes left, 1 minute left, actually. If I can hand over to Stan, because everything we've been speaking about goes across the networks managed by companies like HKT. So Stan, please give us the last word on remote security, please.
I think we, as an operator, we're reluctant to give remote access to anyone. So I'm quite conservative on that. So zero trust is quite important, I think, in the upcoming year. So I hope everywhere I can see zero trust in when they apply.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, I think we've got 1 minute to go. Does anybody want to have a single last word? 10 seconds each. Any thoughts? Trust but verify. Don't trust but verify.
No, yes, trust but verified and all of that. But the one that I always urge every organization to look at is to build a security strategy that is aligned to the business, whichever shape and form your business takes, right? Because there is a symbiotic relationship between the business, the network, and cybersecurity. When the business pivots, the network inevitably will change, and you need to rethink about how you embrace cybersecurity to cope with the network evolution, to cope with the business. So therefore, for you to stay secure, you need to always align your security to your business evolution.
Great, thank you very much. I've got the Summers waving at me from headquarters there. We're out of time. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think it was tremendously valuable. different viewpoints, all incredibly good. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Everybody have a great day.